Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 308, with Sabih Bin Wasi from Stellic, talking about course registration, degree planning, and just kind of managing that academic side of a student's life, how they're kind of planning everything out. And for me, it's something that I've really kind of dealt with firsthand in my work as a success coach back in the day. So this topic really interested me, and the idea of really dealing with this head on and really building a platform that is making sure that students are having delightful experiences and making sure that they are registering for courses in the right cadence and not kind of burning themselves out and kind of overloading themselves with a bunch of dense courses all in one semester, and also include some discussion around transfer credits and how best to kind of approach that. But I think it's just, it's just one of those kind of core experiences of student kind of managing their academic life that really deserves to be done well, done efficiently, done effectively, because it has so many other ripple effects that we kind of explore detail and discuss in this episode. So please do enjoy this episode number 308 with Sabih Bin Wasi. Really looking forward to our conversation here, examining, I think, a lot of different things around kind of student-centered work, kind of really getting a hands-on approach to things where it seems like it's sort of a, just a small part of a student's journey, but obviously a very important one around kind of like their, degree planning, course registration, and kind of just how they're kind of navigating and planning out their degree programs, whatever they might be. So I know that's kind of the core of our conversation. Obviously, I think a lot of details that impact that we'll get into here, but we'll start as we always do. Briefly introduce yourself to our audience and the work that Stellic does.
First of all, thank you for having me, Dustin. So I'm a first generation student. I grew up outside of US. And I think that means like the perspective I had of higher ed was quite ambitious one, quite pure, because it wasn't really like affected by how others have done it, because I had no idea. I only knew a very academic version of it. So when I came to college, I was just overwhelmed with the kind of decisions I had to make. And it turns out that like one of the functions of higher ed is to make decisions, not just excel in coursework. That was like a very new thing for me. And as I was navigating that, I realized that like some of these like decisions require context, requires understanding of like, I didn't even know what prerequisites are or electives are, or what's the difference between major and a minor, right? Very basic things. And the idea of, as you mentioned, course planning and registration is very much about creating a plan towards that goal. But I had to understand what those goals even mean, especially coming from a part of the world where curriculum is very structured and very prescribed. So what does it even mean? That was it. I mean, as a sophomore in college, I started thinking about this platform that would help me make better decisions, help me visualize what the decisions are, and then finally act on those decisions, which is the registration piece of it. So kind of became an academic planning platform. As I was building this, it became clear that what I'm doing when I talk to my advisor is not just, first of all, it's not just the one student's experience. This is a very common thing in higher ed where you can feel overwhelmed about these decisions. But then the other thing I realized was advisor's perspective is even more overwhelming than a student. I mean, on average, they're advising 300, 500 students. So it's very hard for them to, provide the best support to each student. So when I talked to my advisor, he said he would love for a platform that would help him identify who needs help and where can we help them. And so that became a new perspective, which I wasn't honestly thinking about that. So it became not only just the academic planning or, registration platform, it started becoming like an advising platform for advisors to identify those students, reach out to them, give them support, those kind of things. And as we are now working on this project, again, I'm still a student. I realized that administrators would love that data. Like if they understand what courses students are planning to take or how they are engaged with the platform, they can certainly manage their resources very differently in a very student-centric way. So that added to the value for all stakeholders. So to be honest, when I think about it, the journey of Stellic, it's very accidental. I was trying to build a platform as a student for myself, just to figure out like what do I want to do with my 4 years there, and ideally make it 4 years and not longer, right? And it turns out that the platform had more to offer for all these stakeholders, from advisors to deans to department heads to registrars and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the journey. I would say now I think of Stellic as very much like this degree management platform where students can navigate the experiences, and we use that engagement to figure out how to best manage resources on campus.
Appreciate you sharing all that, and it's always that kind of classic scratching your own itch kind of origin story of like things like this, which is always sort of like a beautiful thing where it's just like, you had your own unique experience, but like it is obviously this like frequent touch point kind of transaction that students do, every semester, and students are having all across the country and all across the world, and identify that sort of core issue. And then, yeah, like you're saying, kind of validate it with some other people, where it's just like, yeah, it's one of those sort of like things you kind of like take for granted, or it kind of like it is what it is, and it's something just kind of has to happen how it happens or whatever. But like just imagining that it could be better and more collaborative and like interconnected and stuff, and we've had some conversations recently on the podcast about just that idea of a lot of things that you're kind of getting at, of like certainly like kind of transparency or kind of data sharing, or sort of the way that you can kind of interconnect things, students' journey each semester. And then we've talked with other folks where it's like, okay, we'll bring this sort of similar approach to kind of the experience they're having in those courses, make sure they're like, academically successul and all those sort of things. But I think it is that idea of like, everything is sort of interconnected and intersecting and impacting one another. And I know it's just something, kind of what you're getting at was perfectly setting up my next question, is like why doing this process of course registration well is so essential, because I think that's sort of where you're kind of like starting to extrapolate and understand the sort of like fuller context of, certainly it is just that idea of like, yeah, you'd want to have a good user experience with, any platform you use. Certainly, registering for courses, that's important. But like that idea of like the data that it sort of feeds out, or the implications of which courses you take when, matters. What makes this process of course registration so essential to do well?
As I said, like, when you're making those decisions around like 4, 5, 6 courses you're taking, those are the decisions that kind of shape your path in college, right? And if I want to make it a little bit dramatic, I mean, we have schools where they're offering thousands of sections, each semester. And so you're choosing 5, right? 1,000 choose 5 is like billions of possibilities out there. Like, how do I decide that? So that by itself adds a lot of complexity. But then when you add on top of that, they are not isolated decisions. Like when you decide to take courses, shapes your non-course time as well, right? Whether you are doing research work or whether you are in community college and you want to go pick up your kids. So it's like, how do I create my week so that the classes I am taking not only fit into the aspiration I have towards the plan, but also the life I want to live during that semester, right? So it very much has implications. And then you think about the dependencies. I'm sure you think about like prerequisites as an important piece of it, right? Our course is only offered in a spring or every other spring, right? And so when you think about like, what if I don't take this course? The implication of that could be not graduating on time, right? Could be not having clarity about particular content that becomes very relevant down the road. Like even I've talked to students where they say like taking certain courses before allowed them to do internship much sooner, which was very impactful that they couldn't have done if they had waited to take that course like up until senior year. I had friends who didn't realize a particular course was needed. It was no longer offered in spring, and suddenly now they are not graduating on time. I mean, one person actually had a job offer that they couldn't take because now they have to use summer and fall to cover up for those courses, right? So it can have a pretty serious implication. Financial aid is another big thing, like where you have to take classes a certain amount of time. So it is pretty important. We have so many examples where people have taken a particular course accidentally, an elective, and that shaped their life down the road. Like the professor they met, or like some like concentration they ended up taking, which shaped their thing. So it is a very important process in my opinion. And I think at the same time, from a student perspective, the anxiety that's attached to it is also very real. right? Like you go to a library during registration time and you can see how anxious students are to get in the classes they want to get, right? It's kind of like, if you have a Taylor Swift concert and you're trying to get the ticket,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like that, but instead of a concert for one evening, you're kind of determining a path towards your life's future based on some of these things, right? So I think the stakes are high, and the systems that are in place are not making it easy, in my opinion, right? Both in terms of how to make a decision and then how do you act on that decision. Both of them are like not as optimal as you would like. And that's on the student side. If you look at it from the administrator perspective, again, the stakes are high. You have very limited amount of resources, whether it's instructors, building, the time blocks you have, and you got to make a decision about. It's a very hard problem to say, like, okay, when do I offer a particular course during a week? So I have most number of students taking it. So I'm assigning the right seat or classroom to it so I can make the faculty happy with the timing that's there. It's a pretty complicated problem from their perspective as well. And I would say most times I've talked to presidents or provosts and I ask, like, what is the number one reason you get a call from the parents? It's always registration. My kid couldn't get in the classroom that they wanted. And so even from a reputational perspective, the stakes are higher, right? So it's this kind of like juncture from both sides, from students' perspective and the staff perspective, that if this process becomes better, more effective, more seamless, all parties win. And when it's broken, it has a pretty core implication to the journey for the student.
Yeah, I appreciate you covering both kind of sides of the coin here too, just sort of the, kind of institutional priorities and also like the student priorities. And there's so many kind of ripple effects of, like building your schedule, how's it going to kind of impact your life for that semester, and then like your degree plan and kind of, your path and journey, for the next couple of years, if you're going to be able to, finish within a certain target time frame, or, do things or not do certain things, or whatever else. Yeah, it could be like, well, I can't study abroad this one semester because it's the only time this course is available. Yeah, or take that internship or this job, or like, and even like stuff I think about because like many moons ago I worked as a coach and did some kind of advising on course load and everything, and that idea of that you can set your stuff up for just like unnecessary headache around just sort of like, oh, you're taking a lot of like really dense courses all at once. Like you could just kind of spread them out because they are offered. Like they're offered every semester. You don't have to like just pile them on each other. You're just gonna like stress yourself out and like get burnt out. So it's like those sort of things. And as much as you could kind of like build a platform that maybe like flags things, just sort of is like smarter in those ways of like kind of trying to prevent, pitfalls or user error, around like saying like, okay, I want to finish in this time frame. I'm picking these courses and whatever else. I think that idea of the transparency and collaboration, like there could be good opportunities for, I think, the students like checking over their shoulder or advisors and things to be more involved in the process. Then a kind of natural segue here is sort of like we've acknowledged sort of the problems, like why this is so important to do well. There's just a lot of kind of ripple effects here. What do you think are the best opportunities for institutions to kind of innovate or evolve their experience? Because I imagine there's some sort of like tactical approaches, certainly platforms and things like you're building, whatever kind of comes to mind about those best opportunities for institutions to innovate or evolve their course registration experience.
By the way, you are absolutely right on course combinations. It's something we have seen ourselves, like, across all kind of schools like we work with. This idea of course combination, or as people call it, toxic combination, is a very real thing. If you take two certain courses together, or if you take them apart, like even for the same required courses, can have a very real implication on the success for the student, right? So, uh, I think to answer your question, just providing that insight to a student could be helpful. Like, hey, same thing, same content, taking in a certain order could determine how successful you would be, how much you would enjoy that content, right? But on a more like, I think, broader level, we should think about from a student perspective, what context can we provide them so they can make better decisions for themselves? What context can we provide them so they are not in this like buyer's remorse situation? Do they need to know about like historical outcomes of these courses? Do we want to show like how this course connects to the aspirations they have out of the once they go into the workforce? So whatever we can do so the students can make better decisions for themselves. Even things like, hey, it seems like you would love to explore more teamwork stuff, and this course is great for that. It's gonna help you learn that particular skill. So things like that, just whatever information can we provide to make them decisions which are more informed, is like one clear opportunity we have. The other thing I would say is like the whole process of resource allocation or course planning on the institution side isn't very student centric when you think about it, right? Like the schedule is decided before students have any say of what course they want to take or how many people want to take a particular course and things like that. So you're making all these decisions which are very centered around the institution and not so much around the students. And I think that's a big opportunity where, like, because for example, like, in our case, if institutions understand the long-term planning and what students are planning to take in the upcoming term, they can certainly make decisions in a much more insightful way. So they can say, if I offer these particular classes in this particular time, here's what's going to happen. Here's how many students are going to get impacted by that. Or here's how many students won't be able to graduate on time because they need both of these courses and they're offered at the same time, right? So suddenly you can now start making decisions based on how would students react to it. Especially, by the way, right? And we've seen this especially after COVID, where certain courses which were not high in demand just completely changed what the demand looked like, and other courses which turned out to be very like high demand 5 years ago have seen a big decline towards what that looks like, right? So seeing the information, I mean, think about mental health, think about AI. These topics have seen a big swings over the last like 5 years or so. So knowing that would not have you like have 4x size of the wait list than the number of seats available. Like you can avoid these situations based on that. So I think that's another like change that we can do. And as I mentioned, like the whole anxiety part of uh, morning of registration opens and everybody's like on their laptop. We have a school that they're saying that most of their students try to register classes within the 90-second window. Right now, imagine the panic a student would have saying, like, if I don't press the right button in the 90 seconds, I would not get the course I gotta take. I mean, think about like your own experience. Like, what are the most like seamless, delightful buying experiences you can imagine? Like adopting something. I am pretty sure registration won't be on the top of that list. And things which are not as impactful in our journey, in our career development is. And so I'm like aspiring to think about like not only make the schedule of classes more optimal and more student centric, not only providing students a better context, but also thinking about like the actual day of how can we make that experience as delightful as possible. People should feel a sense of like looking forwardness, like hopefulness, things like that at the end of the decision process, not a panic, not like, what have I done kind of like feeling on the student side.
All right, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Forsyth Technical Community College was juggling siloed systems, fragmented data pipelines, and manual workflows across marketing, admissions, and CRM operations. Then they deployed Bolt Agents, Element 451's AI workforce platform. The result? These agents handled over 80% of student inquiries independently, saving 183,060 human minutes, and cutting call volumes by 14% within just 1 week of rollout. Curious what your AI teammates could look like? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents. It's interesting things that I guess you're sort of alluding to, too, of like around helping to inform how institutional leaders like plan out which courses to offer when, like if you can sort of like tap into that sort of like data or demand or interest or whatever else. And then like this course has these sort of learning outcomes or offers these skills or whatever else. And that idea of like, oh, you might be interested in this because you took this course, or just even the acknowledgement of like, you've taken a lot of courses on like this. Here's something else that could be sort of like complementary. So that could be like, you might not get a lot out of this course as maybe one of your electives or whatever else. Like, there's that idea of like, if you're presented with like this path of least resistance, you're certainly going to take it. But then like, again, at least, you flag issues or you give warnings or whatever, they sort of like knowingly are being like, nope, yep, I'm making this choice knowing that is the case. Or being like, well, actually, yeah, I never would have considered that course because I was just kind of going based on like, oh, this will probably be easy. It'll just check the box or whatever else. So I think there's like a lot of really interesting things there. Like obviously the core of it, what you're saying, like definitely the North Star that should be guiding how institutional leaders are approaching their course registration process is like, let's make it as delightful as possible and just reduce the friction, reduce the anxiety and kind of the high stakes nature of things. But I think the kind of like big thing that I didn't want to like, not mention at all, I think, in this process is the dynamic of students coming in with transfer credit. So I'm sure that comes up in a lot of your conversations. If you could just talk briefly about like, common problems with transfer credits and how you're sort of like acknowledging or sort of integrating or kind of tackling that issue in this kind of whole space?
Yeah, I think the diversity piece is a big piece, by the way, of that. Like, because the other thing, as you were saying, I was thinking about it is, uh, no two students are alike, right? And so, how they are making decisions about course registration is very much driven by their aspirations and their background, right? And their personalities. Like, what kind of learning modes would they prefer? Those kind of things, right? And to answer your piece on transfer, it was my personal experience myself. I came in again. Keep in mind, I don't know what prerequisites are, what electives are. I also don't know what transfer means. Like this idea that you had done something in the past could boost your journey on campus. I am not even aware that's a possibility, right? As I come in, I'm taking a bunch of courses, and I'm realizing like three of the courses I have already taken or I am like currently enrolled in. Much later, by the way, like in I think a second or third semester, I could get transfer credit for. And I'm like, wait, did I just waste like half of my semester? In fact, it ended up being a whole semester of courses that I didn't really need, and I believe I saw somewhere like nearly half of the credit students take are lost in transfer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whenever a student is trying to change their thing. And the curriculum is same. I could feel it, by the way, in the classroom. I'm taking a bunch of things that I already know what the answers to these questions are, but I'm still sitting through or what that looks like. So I think it's actually a pretty critical piece, especially now. And when in campuses are thinking about like all ways to increase their enrollment. I think transfer is actually a pretty important tool on the thing, like bringing more transfer students, whether it's from 2 year to 4 year, whether it's from like one campus to another campus, or even things like I want to be near my parents for summer and I want to take a bunch of classes and I want to understand that taking them will still keep me on track for graduating on time. So I do think transfer is a very relevant piece. The definition of a student has evolved quite a bit, over the last 10-15 years, and this idea of somebody just goes to high school and will start fresh isn't the majority persona. Actually, the majority persona is this non-traditional learner, somebody who has taken classes in different majors, different campuses, things like that. And I think it actually has a big equity problem. So this is something I learned myself, like, as I've started talking to campuses. So many of these campuses are doing things on a per student basis. So two students can come in with the exact same course they have taken in the past from the exact same university with the exact same grade and completely get different treatment in what will transfer and what will not transfer. Why? Because it's dependent on a person who is processing that and it's in their mind. Multiple campuses have told me that it's in their head. It's in the transfer articulation officer's head of what the rules are. So it's not even written. And so it's a pretty real issue, which I think has an equity problem as well. The way we are imagining this to go is one, let's understand those rules. Let's solidify those rules. Let's not make those rules one off per student. And if there are conditions where certain rules can only apply for a particular department or things like that, sure, like can capture the conditions attached to it. But let's document these rules. And if you can document the rules, especially now with all the modern technologies, we can have a student upload a transcript, whatever their transcript is from high school, from another campus, from community college. And we can run that against the rules that have been set in the system. And in real time, we can tell a student, hey, guess what? You don't need 4 years. You can graduate in 3 years. Here are the courses that you've already completed. And because of that, here are the majors where you can accelerate your on time graduation from that sense. And suddenly you're telling a student a very personalized plan without any human involvement, by the way, of like what would the experience look like should they decide to come here, right? So, and I'm sure like we'll hit certain situations where we haven't seen that particular course or particular transfer request before. In that case, we can make a workflow. We can make sure it's easy for students to request for the credit. It runs through like faculty evaluation, things like that. That's totally fine. But most campuses we work with, they say it's like 80-20. 80% times we have actually seen that exact same request before, right? And so you can help them identify what that looks like. And, that could just provide, one, it could provide like such better decision making for students. Some campuses don't even tell whether the course will transfer or not for 6, 8, 10 months after admissions. right? And then students end up dropping out and they're like unsure how long it will take based on that decision. But it also provides insights to the enrollment teams to understand like how many where the students are coming from, like which students are interested, and they can then focus their energy on certain portion of like student population more than others. So there's like certainly benefit to both sides of it, and I do think transfer strategy is going to play a core role in how universities will increase their enrollment in the coming years.
Yeah, and I think like in this space, it would be like a major gap to not be like if you're approaching thinking about like refreshing, innovating, improving on your course registration process. It's like you have to be thinking about how you're, including transfer credit sort of evaluation and stuff into this because I think it is like the unfortunate thing is that like it is just this like time intensive process, and I think nobody's going to say it works well as it is at most institutions, and that like but it's just this like big, ugly, hairy, problem where it's like nobody I think really, really wants to like confront it or deal with it or whatever. And then, like you're saying, I think like, my guesstimation is like a lot of institutions that you're saying, like, it's just like they're dealing with each individual request as if it's like the first time that they've ever seen somebody ask for credit. It's like, no, you probably have seen that exact course from that exact institution many times before. And then like, let's try to like codify that or whatever else. And like, certainly have humans in the loop. But I think it's like, you could start to kind of like have some self-service here, at least like giving a student some, shorthand for being like, okay, here's what you want to do. Like we've seen similar students like, get this transferred for this. So like it needs final approval, whatever. But like kind of that idea, like when you do things and they're like putting all the asterisks on it, but at least being like, most of the time this will transfer in. You do need to provide these things that it does need to be evaluated by a department head. But like, just that idea of like, certainly when you're like thinking about applying or, accepting to, transfer into a different institution. And that's obviously going to be a big thing on your mind is just being like, is there a possibility of these credits that have already taken transferring in and making no guarantees, but trying to give some realm of understanding based on, having like your kind of, maybe at least just like the unofficial transcript, you can submit that in. It's like, okay, we have to like, verify official, this, that, the other, whatever, but I think it's just those sort of things of like, giving reassurances, making the process look, work a little bit more efficiently and effectively, and then, just saving everybody time, like, because I think it's just one of those, again, like transactions, like course registration, it's going to happen fairly often, but have really major kind of ripple effects for, that student's journey from there onward. So as we wind down the conversation here, though, curious if there's anything that you're working on at Stellic right now that just kind of has you excited for the future of your organization, your work and everything, anything that you want to tease for the audience?
Yeah, well, first of all, like this whole like work around transfer experience is certainly something that's getting me excited about like what we can do. I mean, keep in mind we started with a degree planning platform, right? And so seeing the platform become this like end-to-end journey for students like even before they apply to university is super exciting. We have been also thinking about like the last leg of that journey, so like connecting their academic plan with their careers is something that like has gotten me excited about. Why is there a career office separate from an academic office which is separate from like all these different offices on campus? Wouldn't it make sense, especially for majority of students where they are in college because they expect some kind of connection to their career? It will make sense when they're making those decisions in their second year to give visibility of what that looks like. So we have been thinking about the other end of that spectrum as well, on the career connection side of as well. um there are many things. Listen, I think just the journey of Stellic over the last couple of years have been so inspiring to me of like doing more. Like 2 years ago, we had, I believe, 200,000 students on the platform. We just crossed like 1.3 million students on the platform. And so that growth has gotten me. I've been imagining like what can we do when you have millions of students waiting to be impacted by the work we are doing. And the other thing that actually is awesome is like these students are not coming from one type of schools. Like we have schools from community colleges, from liberal arts, from R1 AAU schools. So you have all this like diversity here. We have schools outside of US. We have schools in like Australia, in Qatar, in Canada, in Mexico. So I'm just very excited about like what can we do with something like this, and how can we make higher ed a more fulfilling dream for as many students as possible and make it less work and less anxiety for staff members as well. In terms of the platform, I think there is a bunch of work we have been thinking about, especially with this new the new technology, like the AI stuff that's happening, has opened up doors of possibilities that weren't true 5, 10 years ago, right? As you mentioned the idea about like course outcomes, right? And annotating things. I have been trying to have campuses annotate courses for like 7 years now.
Mhm.
And it's always like, well, we won't have time and this things in that nature. But now we can analyze their syllabi. We can analyze like bunch of these things and do this soft annotation of the coursework, which could honestly be game changing about like things that required manual work. Pathway is another example. Like you can either tell students what requirements there are, or you can create a pathway. And I have been trying to build pathways not just for a major, but major plus outcome. So two computer science students can one go to research work and do a PhD after undergrad. The other person can go do a startup. And the third person can go work in a large company. Ideally they should have different decisions when they in their college, right? And so imagine asking creating thousands of pathways by institutions. They just don't have time, and sometimes even like that insights to make those decisions. So we have been using technology for all of that, helping administrators make better insights, better decisions is another area we are doing thinking about. So the bunch of work that's happening that's gotten me excited, and some of the work is not so cool, right? One of the biggest barriers I've noticed, probably the biggest barrier of adoption of technology in higher ed, is the change management. How long will it take, and what does the onboarding look like, right? And we have identified so many steps in the process that can be transformed, can be automated in the way we have been doing things. What used to take months can be done in like days now. So that's another like it's not so like super cool kind of stuff, but a very impactful work that it could do with adoption of technology on campuses. So there's a lot to be excited about. I'm really looking forward to the next few years.
Yeah, that's awesome. All good stuff there. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's acknowledging like change management pieces, something that we talk a lot about on this show. It's just sort of really making mention of that because, yeah, it's a big kind of factor and variable about, if this new cool, shiny platform, whatever, actually like gets implemented, gets used and sort of optimized and all that good stuff. So, yeah, that can be something where it's just like, oh, we know that this is like a crucial decision maker. We're just getting better at sort of like, working with them or kind of scratching their itch. And I think that's, just as important as all the kind of like, yeah, like feature sets of, different platforms and stuff. And I look forward to kind of just seeing more of your all's journey there. But we will wrap up here as we always do. What advice or call to action would you give to the leaders listening to this episode to wrap everything up?
A couple of things. One, I would say, like as hopefully this conversation would have shown, this work is very meaningful. Like helping students make better decisions, helping them set them for success, things which are not about coursework or inside classroom experience is actually very meaningful and sometimes shape the lives of students even more so than the coursework around it. So hopefully you can see that based on this conversation we had today. Um, I do think technology is exciting. There's so many different ways you can think about applying technology platforms on campus, and they're very exciting. I would encourage higher ed leaders to think about that as more of a change agent and not like lipstick on a like what's it called, lipstick on a pig
Yeah.
thing, where like you can keep the things as is. Sometimes we work on campuses and they say like we will change nothing about our process, about our policies, about like how we have done things, but we want a platform, and the platform usually then starts adapting to those blockers that exist. I mean, we have few situations where we would ask people like, why do we do this, like why is this policy exist? And the answer was like, oh, this person made that call. And okay, why did they make a call? And they were like, oh, yeah, they passed away 5 years ago. So the person isn't even alive. It's been there for decades. And we're thinking about like doing these cool technologies to sit on top of that. So I would encourage higher ed to think about technology onboarding as more of an opportunity to review what processes are serving the mission, serving the students, and which of them are coming in the way. right? And so having that holistic perspective is, I think, is way more impactful than having a short-sighted solution of it. So that would be one insight we have got in working with a few partners.
Yeah, I appreciate the mention there of sort of like policies, procedures, and that sort of thing. Because I think that kind of forms the like trifecta, a very comprehensive kind of viewpoint on all of this of like the change management piece, the culture, the platform, the tools, and then that idea of like the policy and procedures and things that sort of inform how everybody is sort of interfacing with what tools and things they have. So appreciate, your thoughtfulness and your commitment to this and just all that you shared. We'll have ways to connect with you and Stellic in the description for this episode. And just, to look forward to kind of just seeing more dispatches from your journey doing this important work. And thank you so much for hanging out for this episode.
Thank you for having me, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.net.